Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Nerdstrodamus. I'm Dr. Paz.
I'm Lambo.
And today, in this episode, we're going to revisit something from one of our earliest episodes. Mm-hmm. If you've been watching us for a long time, or maybe look back in the archives...
You know we like Final Fantasy.
You know we like Final Fantasy. And our third episode ever was dedicated to Final Fantasy 15.
And how excited we were for it.
And guess what we did after that?
We did KupoCon.
But we never talked about 15 on camera ever again.
Partly because we were afraid to.
We were working with KupoCon, you know, Final Fantasy fan event and whatnot, and we also just wanted to stop reviewing games because we're bad at it. Because as filthy casuals, we don't beat games very quickly.
No.
We take our time with them.
And we only really finish games that we like, so everything gets a 4 or a 4.5.
Yeah. After all this time, let's look back at Final Fantasy 15, and we're going to not review it.
No.
But we need to talk about it.
Yeah. This comes from a place of love. We've met a lot of the people who are creatively involved in the game.
We've met a lot of people who really love the game. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I mean, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I beat it.
Oh, yeah.
And as you said...
There's a lot to love there.
Right. We only finish games that we love. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm a big JRPG fan. It is my favorite genre of games, and I know you also like JRPGs.
Mm-hmm. Even though I'm not that weeby in almost every other way, I love me a JRPG. They're like the best. And
a lot of great JRPGs have come out in the past couple of years.
Yeah, and it's sort of weird because, you know, Final Fantasy 15 kind of sort of started this like weird little,
Renaissance.
Oh, we have an entire episode about it from a year ago.
Yeah, we do actually.
Where we're just seeing JRPGs come back, and we can't help but find Final Fantasy 15 lacking.
Very lacking, considering some of the other ones that have come out and just been better.
Yeah.
Again, we like 15, and there are some amazing things about it, but there's a lot I can learn from some other games that have come out, done the JRPG thing, been modern games, and been better.
These are 4 games that Final Fantasy 15 can learn something from.
So let's start with the big one, because this is by far my favorite game of last year and is one of the few modern games to break into my top 10 favorite games of all time.
Nice.
Persona 5.
What an amazing game. So you got it for me for Christmas last year?
Yeah.
And after you had played it, and I was just blown away by it. Particularly the story. Yes.
There are people who will tell you that the story is not as good as Persona 3 or 4, but it's an amazing story.
Yeah.
It's well written. You've got a lot of depth going on there.
And there's always story going on. So even if because the game, of course, is a little bit kind of open-ended, you get time during the day to go about your business.
It is kind of open world. Yeah. And you do get time during the day to do things, but everything you do has a story attached to it.
There's no way to waste time.
No.
You know, because everything you do puts you one step closer towards something you want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Which brings us to what Final Fantasy 15 can learn for Persona 5, and that's just story in general.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy, almost all of the games have an amazing story to them.
Oh, it's so easy to get swept up in a game like Final Fantasy 9. So much whimsy, so much heartbreak. An epicness at the end, of course.
Final Fantasy 12 with its political intrigue and that kind of stuff going on. And even Final Fantasy 8 with its time compression BS.
And love story. In space. It's so cool.
But 15, in terms of story, is the first Final Fantasy I got to the end and actually stopped and said, what happened?
The car blew up.
By the way, spoilers.
The car blew up. No, and there are really good character moments. There are really good, things to kind of build up to. There's so many moments that are really memorable, but at the same time, I feel like it either flew by too quickly in some cases or drug on too long.
The story wasn't paced well. Things either went by too quick that you didn't have time to absorb it, or it was too long that you were bored with it and you wanted it to just get over with. And even by the end, the final confrontation, everything, when the story was said and done, I was left feeling kind of empty. And Persona 5 is not that way. I grew to love everything that happened in that game. Every dungeon had some kind of real big emotional impact leading up to the end, which you haven't finished it. It's crazy. There's all kinds of twists and turns.
But either way, we feel that from a game like from Persona 5, which is a way more traditional JRPG, they managed to tell a modern story, interestingly, in a new way, ways that I've never seen a story be really told in a video game before, without necessarily, jumping the shark a little bit.
You might change your mind when you get to the end.
We'll see what happens.
But nonetheless, when it comes to the story, I think it can learn from Persona 5. That leads us to our next one, which is another amazing JRPG, and it's probably going to be my game of the year this year, and that is Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Ooh. So a Switch exclusive. Yeah. From actually a long-running series.
Kinda.
The
spiritual series.
But anyway, Xenoblade 2, another JRPG, kind of open world, active combat system. It kind of seems a lot like Final Fantasy 15, but what did it do better than 15? What can 15 learn from it?
Oh yeah, DLC.
This is my biggest complaint with Final Fantasy 15. It completely took me out of the game a couple of times. So 15's DLC, you could get the season pass.
Sure.
And it gave you the Comrades DLC, some other things that popped up, and then the episode Ignis, Gladio, Prompto, all that. My issue is playing through that game, not having the season pass. I didn't have it. It was painfully obvious where those episodes fit in. Yeah. Specifically the one part where Gladio's like, I'm leaving, bye, and he wanders off. And then later you team up with somebody who's completely like disguised from head to toe, and you're like, oh, who is this? And surprise, it's Gladio! And it's obvious that between those two moments, that's where his episode fits in. It's just shoehorned in there. It doesn't feel like it belongs there. And you had to get the DLC.
Yeah. And when we were at AkupoCon, somebody asked Adam Crosdell this question about it.
Yeah, okay.
And it was the tough question. And he answered it like a champ, of course, because unfortunately if you're that close to it all, you can't completely denounce. There was definitely a little bit of cynicism in the answer, but his answer essentially was, you know what? Square Enix is a company. They have their ways of making money. Who's going to argue with their, thing? That what they are trying to do, though, is kind of put forth a nice big storyline, and supporting a game after release is a really important thing in modern gaming. Right. Which is why when we talk about Xenoblade, it's such a different sort of situation. With the Xenoblade season pass, we've gotten so many new characters, so many new blades, a ton of new missions, side quests out the wazoo. We're getting an entire story DLC coming up here.
That's a prequel to the game. Now it gets
and is actually going to be able to be played completely separately from the main game. So even if you didn't buy the main game,
you can buy the expansion.
Yeah.
The Circle of Torna DLC.
Yeah. And while it costs money and stuff, it has no bearing on the overall story and doesn't necessarily feel like something you have to play.
I'm pretty sure if you want to. I'm pretty sure the Xenoblade DLC is cheaper.
Yeah, overall.
The season pass is cheaper than the Final Fantasy 15.
Yeah, because it was $24.99 for the Final Fantasy one.
Oh, I thought it was over 30.
Yeah, I think it was $24.99.
I thought it was $34.99.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, Xenoblade 1's 30.
But then the Royal Edition was an extra $20.
Which therein lies something else. You buy the season pass for Final Fantasy 15 and you don't get everything.
No.
They had released the Royal Edition, which added more. The Xenoblade 2 Season Pass lets you have access to everything. And then this goes on to my other thing where I talked about with 15, where it didn't feel like the complete story. I needed the Season Pass to get these chunks of story where the characters wandered off. Xenoblade 2, nothing feels like there's a gap.
No. In fact, you're like, man, can there be less? Please, there be less.
Final Fantasy 15 took me about 30, 40 hours to beat. Xenoblade 2 took me over 100.
Yeah.
And that was...
I'm like 45 hours in, and I'm not even,
And even the DLC expansion, the Circle of Torna, while it is a prequel, you get a lot of that in the game, enough to fill in the gaps in the story. You're not left really needing anything else, but you could want more, which is what that expansion's for.
Which is what a DLC, I think, is kind of made to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And all the extra stuff they're supporting with it. I mean, as you said, all the characters and whatnot, that's insane. So, DLC was Xenoblade 2. Let's talk about another one.
Nier Automata.
You haven't played this?
No. But I've seen it in action.
It is another Square Enix game.
And it looks amazing.
It is amazing.
If I didn't have, like,
50 million.
Yeah. I totally hop on that.
So what can Final Fantasy 15 learn from Nier?
It looked like it had amazing combat.
So 15 was an open world action-oriented RPG. I mean, it was an active combat system.
More than ever before, the Final Fantasy games have been moving in this direction probably since Final Fantasy 11, I would say.
Probably.
When they adopted more of an MMO style, combat system, where this takes it in a truly, straight up action, almost
which kind
Kingdom Hearts-esque kind of battle system.
Since it was based off Versus 13, that was supposed to be the gameplay. Mm-hmm. But then you have a game like Nier that is a third-person action RPG, and the combat is flawless. Like that, the combat is actiony, smooth.
It can be described as, action RPG meets Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, that kind of style.
So Square Enix published the game. Do you know who developed it? Platinum.
Oh. Well, it makes perfect sense then.
It does.
Of course.
It's from a company that knows action games, and the combat works so well. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times playing 15 that the combat it felt stuttery. It didn't feel smooth. It didn't feel fluid. There's a lot going on with there. And
sometimes things I wanted to do wouldn't happen the way I wanted it to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and while the game has totally improved the combat since it first released, that's unfortunately kind of, we kind of want a full game when it comes out.
Right. And I played 15 and I beat it, and I never got the season pass, and because of my experience with it, I don't really want to go back and play it again. I enjoyed it, but not as much as the other Final Fantasies I've played. Mm-hmm. And it just... And while some people may say, well, go back and play it now with all the improvements, I want a complete package up front, which goes along with all these games we're talking about.
Yeah.
Every one of these games released as a complete package. There haven't really been any updates that have majorly changed how the game works, how it plays. Even Persona 5 has basically nothing. There's no expansions for that.
So some costumes maybe? Or
some costumes and some legacy personas if you really want them.
No big deal.
Right. Now,
which leads us to our last.
Final Fantasy 15 was one of the first Final Fantasy games to truly take the open world.
Mm-hmm. Outside of the online games, of course.
Outside the online games, outside of traveling on a world map and then going into towns and stuff.
Right.
It was really open world, and it was new for the franchise. Mm-hmm. Another game within a year did the same thing, and that was Zelda. Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, now it can be argued whether Legend of Zelda is ever an RPG, but it's easy to argue that Breath of the Wild is the most RPG-ish out of all of them ever.
Right.
So that could be that could be an entire YouTube channel. Legend of Zelda is an RPG, and a whole series cutting everyone down.
I would not watch that.
But either way, the way they handled the open world in Legend of Zelda is almost the most genius way possible. Playing the game is so strange because there's no other open world game where you just happen to wander in a direction and you run into 10,000 cool things to do. You never feel like you're directionless at the same time.
No.
It's a strange sort of open worldness, where in Final Fantasy 15, the open world has left a lot to be desired.
I'll be honest, I never really felt like it was an open world.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
It was, and
you literally can walk from one side of the map to the other. It will take you hours.
It will,
because the world is humongous. But I feel like there's nothing in the world, or there's very little. Or if I'm going to actually go do any crazy exploring, it's going to take me way longer than I need to take. And if I want to get over there, I have to hop in the car and watch basically a 10-minute cinematic while my car gets there.
I mean, at times you could skip that and be one place and then the other, and it was
sometimes,
fast travel.
Yeah.
But Final Fantasy 15's world doesn't feel developed enough. It feels like it could be more. Yeah. Breath of the Wild,
and it has opened up so much more. There's so many more areas now with the Royal Edition. There's the second parts to all the dungeons. Look.
I know.
But there's a lot more effort that needs to go into playing the game to get those things and make use out of that world than there would be otherwise. If I want to get from point A to point B, I'll run into a bunch of enemies. Yeah, the Magitech soldiers will come down and attack you, but it's not that kind of weird world of wonder and discovery that it could be.
I didn't want to travel around and find different things and whatnot. I wasn't compelled like I would be in Breath of the Wild or a lot of other open world RPGs. Yeah. It wasn't quite there. Mm-hmm. Now,
it's not to say that there weren't little moments of brilliance in this game.
I will always commend 15 for the camaraderie that I felt amongst the 4 main characters.
And that actually really went a long way to make the game feel like you weren't alone in this whole humongous big world.
Right.
That made things feel really fun. So if you do happen to hop in a chocobo and you listen to Prompto singing along with the song and that's adorable.
I mentioned in the beginning with the story that by the end of 15 I didn't really feel as much. I'm actually getting goosebumps thinking about this.
Yeah.
There is one moment at the end of the game that does it choked me up a little bit, and it's when you're you take a picture with you into the final battle, and it's you and your Chocobros, and Prompto, Gladio, Ignis, Noctis, all those guys together, they did a great job of being a group of friends. And I really cared for their friendship and their dynamics in the game. 15 did that very, very well.
Many games fail miserably at creating a party that you can care about.
Right. I would argue Persona 5 does a fairly good job of that, but not as well as 15 did.
And one thing that we don't want to see ever not happen again is we don't want to see Square Enix kind of backing down on a Final Fantasy game again.
No.
Final Fantasy 15 sold a ton, more than a lot of other Final Fantasy games, any modern ones especially.
Right.
And the way they supported it when it launched, all these extra little mini games.
And then there was the Kingsglaive movie.
Yeah.
And there was the anime that went before it. There was all this stuff. They pushed it real hard. And we want them to do it. That
was amazing. And that can never be understated, that we want to have our Final Fantasy games be epic and wonderful and episodic and crazy. But we also, Yeah.
Now, if you loved 15, that's okay. You can love 15. We're not saying that you're wrong for liking it.
Yeah.
And we don't hate it.
No. Oh, my goodness.
We do like it, too. It's just we've played pretty much every Final Fantasy game.
And we only care because this series is so close to our hearts. And it has so much gloriousness in the past. And, of course, this game's selling so well, it's going to tell Square Enix, hey, this is the right thing to do. And we kind of want to say, give yourself some pause. Especially with the remake of 7 coming out. Right. And it's looking mighty similar to 15.
It's changing hands.
It makes you worry. Makes you worry just a little.
Which brings me to my biggest problem I have with Final Fantasy 15. It has an identity crisis. We know this game started as Versus 13, which then went dark, and then years and years later it gets brought back out as 15.
And the original version of 15 we saw in the original trailers was very different from the final product we ended up seeing.
Which was different from Versus 13.
So we knew that there was a lot of, developmental possible turmoil. That's us, of course, projecting. But at the same time, who knows what the original concept was and where they lost the plot,
To me, it feels like, because Versus 13 was going to be a more linear action game.
Nothing wrong with it.
No.
Give us a linear action Final Fantasy game. I don't care.
Yeah, I would have loved that. I mean, I love Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, Onimusha, all those kinds of games. They're awesome. But then when they decided to make it a full Final Fantasy game, they said, oh, no, we got to make it an open world. And they took this idea, and... you got chocolate in my peanut butter. You got peanut butter in my chocolate. But... it didn't work as well. And that's my problem with 15. It is still a good game. It had some great qualities that got me to finish it.
And now, especially at this point, if you were to pick it up now that everything's out, I bet it's a wonderful, awesome, complete package that is, super crazy.
If you got the Royal Edition, I mean, you got all that extra stuff in there, and it is a good experience. I just think that Square Enix and the Final Fantasy team needs to take a look at some other things that are out right now and some things that are doing very, very well and learn from it.
And we really want to kind of point out that all the games we talked about today were JRPGs that maybe kind of handled some things a little bit more of a traditional way, but also did it in a modern context. Persona 5 is a modern game wrapped around an old school battle system, Right. Legend of Zelda really introduces nothing new in terms of story or, direction in the game, but totally revolutionizes the open world.
Right.
Yeah.
Xenoblade, in all honesty, feels story-wise very classic. There's nothing really crazy about that story, but you've got all these kind of new gimmicks and conventions in it that are really, really cool. I don't know what to say about Nier.
This is really awesome.
It's really
got
awesome.
Style out the butt. It's good.
Actually, I would say all of these games have a lot of style, and that's another thing Final Fantasy needs. It needs a cohesive style to it, because I felt like the settings in that game didn't quite all mesh. But we only say this because, again, we're worried about the future of Final Fantasy, and we want them to not what am I looking for here?
Yeah, we care.
We care.
And whenever Final Fantasy 16 gets announced, or when this 7 remake materializes, we hope they take more of a cue from either older Final Fantasy games or some other contemporary JRPGs before they make the leap and just say, here's the first 3 hours of the game, here's the rest in DLC, and the like. Yeah.
Oh boy, that makes me a little frightened.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We know that they've got good pedigree behind them. I mean, I even like 13. I like Final Fantasy 13. Despite what anybody says.
Final 13 is like one of the best. Yeah. If you don't like it,
come at us.
Bring it on.
But it also all comes down to personal opinion. But still, we'd like to see something change maybe for the next one. But we'll have to wait and see. But for Nerdstrodamus, I'm Dr. Pants.
Lambo.
Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and comment below. Tell us what you think. Tell us if we're horribly wrong, or tell us if you share some of our opinions.
Yell at us. Yell at us.
It gets us sad.
Do it.
Okay. We'll see you next time.
#FinalFantastic.
Oh, crap!